Zoom?
No need, sir. No need. Is it okay?
Okay.
Okay.
So as you know, this is my topic which I have selected for today's talk. So peasant migration in medieval Karnataka is the topic which I will be discussing. Of course, so this is an important topic. So I was told that I would like to talk about something about economic history of uh, of the medieval period, perhaps. So that is my area. So I thought I will talk about the peasant migration because I had worked a little bit on this topic. So that is the reason why I have taken this this topic of peasant migration in medieval Karnataka. Because my education, everything was from Karnataka only. So basically, I am from Mangalore. So Mangalore University, I did my MPhil and PhD. I mean, PhD was in Goa University. But yeah, so I have that interest in the history of Karnataka. So okay. So let me start my lecture now. So basically, it is about the medieval period. So during that period, 13th century to 16th century, I have taken. So Karnataka was ruled by the kingdoms like Hoysalas and Vijayanagara, as you know. When there were major developments like emergence of Hoysalas, and also there was the decline of the Cholas, decline and fall of Cholas. So that is what we see. So with the fall of the Cholas, we find the rise of the Hoysalas. And after that, as you know, the Hoysalas decline and there was emergence of Vijayanagara. So it is this period which I will be taking up today to analyze, to discuss, the major development. Particularly, I am interested in the economic activities about agricultural production, about the peasants, about the various agricultural communities. So these are the various aspects which I will be talking about today. And Hoysalas declining, and with that we find the emergence of Vijayanagara. So so there was existence of the various peasant communities. If you look at it, when you talk about the peasants, it is not a monolithic. It is not one category of peasants. There are various categories of peasants. So you find the higher category peasants, you find the rich peasants, the prosperous peasants, and also poor peasants. So you find landless peasants. So two categories of peasants that I try to identify. One is the dominant peasantry, and the second is the subordinate peasants. So two categories of peasants that I try to analyze, I try to discuss. So one is dominant peasants, the peasantry who were dominant. So they had a lot of money, so they had a lot of land, so and also they had a lot of power, and also they had contacts with the state. So we find they made a very close relationship with the state. And second is subordinate peasants whom we call as subalterns, we can say, because they did not have the kind of power that the dominant peasants had. So we find it was the subordinate peasants who were at a they had the problem of payment of taxes and all those things. So they had to bear the burden of taxes. So that is a major issue which affected the subordinate peasants. Now, I will begin with the study of nature of state of Hoysalas as well as Vijayanagara, particularly about Vijayanagara. Because various historians have tried to analyze, tried to discuss the nature of both the states, Hoysala state as well as Vijayanagara state. So there is a medieval period that is what I will be focusing on. So we find William Coelho, who wrote a classic work on the Hoysalas. He talks about the council of ministers assisting the king and also the various officials like Mahasamanta, Samanta, Dhannayakas, Hegedes, Gaundas. All these are the part of the imperial administration. And we find also the political hierarchy and military hierarchy. So we find various categories of the officials, the feudatories, nobles, court nobles. All these people were there. So we find that there was existence a political hierarchy as well as a military hierarchy. We find that there are soldiers are there, and also there are commanders. So all these people are the part of the particular imperial state. So we find that So some scholars are trying to use the concepts, like for example, the idea of feudalism as a major theory, which has been used by the historians like R. Sharma, so we find there is feudalism, debate regarding feudalism among the scholars in the early medieval time, whether there's feudalism or not. So one study says that Hoysala state was a feudal state. So whether this is somewhat acceptable is also a question, because we find the Hoysala period there was trade and urbanization, and also there was the existence of, I already find it, as it's very large trade. So in that context, whether we can accept this feudalism argument in the case of Karnataka and the Hoysalas is also a question. But Deret says that, Deret is another scholar who has worked on the Hoysalas. You must be aware of it if you are student of Karnataka history. Says that Hoysalas can be compared with the constitutional monarchy of England. So he's trying to compare the English monarchy with the Hoysala monarchy, which implies that the king was the source of the state power, but his power was controlled, limited by the presence of the council of ministers, landlords, and other subordinates who could question his leadership. So a kind of constitutional monarchy, may not be exactly constitutional monarchy, but we find that this idea of Oriental despotism has been questioned by Deret in this way, because so the early colonial scholars trying to say that India was ruled by the Oriental despots, that the king was the only owner of land, and there was the lack of trade, there was lack of markets. All those kind of arguments were made by some of the colonial historians, so which has been termed as Oriental despotism or shifting mode of production. So this is the argument of Deret. So we will look at the other scholars like Saletur, for example. B.S. Saletur is a historian of Karnataka. Then there's Bertenstein is there. So Noburu Karashima. So these are all modern historians. Bertenstein and Noburu Karashima, they're trying to use various concepts and various theories, trying to understand the nature of the state. Now, Saletur believed that as a historian who was working in 1930s, 1940s, he believed that Vijayanagara was centralized state. I'm talking about Vijayanagara now, so we moved from Hoysalas to Vijayanagara. So Saletur is saying that Vijayanagara was centralized state, which had large numbers of officials, so it was possible for the state to centralize administration. Now, if you're a student of ancient Indian history, if you're a student of medieval Indian history, we find there's a lot of discussion among the scholars regarding the nature of state. Some scholars saying that there was centralized state, some scholars saying that no, it was basically mostly it was decentralized state. Argument of Fussman, for example, regarding the Mauryan state, saying that in pre-modern India you cannot have a centralized state. So this kind of argument also is there among some historians. And Saletur also said that if you look at the taxation rate, it was somewhat reasonable. It was not too high, and it was somewhat did not hurt the peasants much, because the taxation rate was not much, so it did not put a lot of pressure on the peasants. And his argument is applicable in the case of dominant peasants. So as I mentioned earlier, that there are dominant peasants and also there are subordinate peasants. So, but we find many peasants who are staying at the lower level of agrarian structure, so they suffered from heavy taxation and what is called forced labor. As you know, you must be aware of the serfdom, which is a part of feudalism, is aspect of the feudal system or the mode of production that we find. So the particular agrarian structure. So we find that the peasants were at the bottom of the agrarian structure. So if you look at landless peasants and subordinate peasants, so it was those kind of peasants who suffered because of the state policies. Okay, so the kind of taxes which were imposed. So when the taxes were imposed, the dominant peasant did not pay the taxes, or they paid less amount of taxes, and they extracted a large amount of surplus produce from the lower category of peasants, that is the subordinate peasants. So that is what we can find here. Now, Bertenstein, if you have studied the history of Cholas and also history of Vijayanagara, you find, of course, he wrote a book on Vijayanagara. He wrote a book on Cholas, so peasant state and society in South India. His theory of a segmentary state, where he's trying to discuss the nature of Vijayanagara state. And of course, segmental state had applied in the case of Cholas. And then he applies the same theory in the case of Vijayanagara. He says that both the Cholas and Vijayanagara were segmentary states, he says. Cholas because of the existence of Nadus, Vijayanagara because of the existence of Nayakas. He says that Nayakas were autonomous units in the Vijayanagara administration. So naturally, the state did not have the power or ability to centralize administration. They could not centralize administration. So if that is the case, Chola and Vijayanagara are both are almost one and the same, because the state was not able to centralize administration. This is what he says, because his assumption is that in India, no state can be centralized state, and all states are decentralized states, or even segmentary state, he says, not decentralized state as such, but segmentary state. So that is the argument of Bertenstein. So in the case of Vijayanagara also, he says it was a segmentary state. Now, we find that in the case of Hoysalas and Vijayanagara kings, we find there are many officials, there are many feudatories in the form of governors are there, military commanders and chieftains. So they are at the secondary level of administration, maybe at the provincial level, or even at the central government also. So we find that they were assisting the government in the administration. But in the case of Vijayanagara, we find a major change emerging, because in the case of the Hoysalas, we find all these military commanders and all those chieftains and Gaundas, all those things, we come across in the Hoysala inscriptions. But Vijayanagara period, we find reference to the rise of Amaranayakas. It is said, Amaranayakas as the people, or the Nayakas, what's called Nayaka system, as discussed by Noburu Karashima and also Bertenstein, where we find these Amaranayakas assisted the state in expanding the empire. So we find Nayakas, Telugu Nayakas and Kannada Nayakas going to Tamil Nadu, so fighting the wars, and they were given particular territory for administration. So we find land was assigned to them, and then they emerge as important power. So we find that they were more autonomous. They were autonomous as autonomous as the Nadus. So this is the argument of Bertenstein, saying that rise of Amaranayakas and there was the emergence of segmental state in the case of Vijayanagara also, like the Cholas. So in the case of Vijayanagara, Bertenstein talks about the two kinds of sovereignties. One is the ritual sovereignty and the real sovereignty. The ritual sovereignty is not the actual sovereignty. It is the king. So it is only for ceremonial purpose. So it is not there for for actual administration. So this argument of Bertenstein, where he says that Nayakas have to submit the tributes and on certain important days, like for example on Mahanavami festival, for example, he talks about Mahanavami festivals, which is based on some of the foreign scholars, Domingo Pais and others, for now units coming to Vijayanagara, going to Hampi and watching all these festivals. So their reports. So based on this, he says that Vijayanagara was a segmentary state, but it does not accept the argument of some scholars. Like, for example, DC Sarkar says that this is a feudal state. So Bertenstein says, no, it is not a feudal state, where as the Nayakas, he says that they were not landed into unlike the European feudal organization. Pardon? Are you able to hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
You are audible and visible, sir.
Okay.
Someone is having the audio, that's why it is disturbing.
Okay. Yeah. So I will continue with that. So Vijayanagara state, I was discussing nature of state. So argument of Bertenstein saying that this was a segmentary state. But Noburu Karashima, he studied the political condition in South India, particularly in Tamil Nadu. He's more concerned with Tamil Nadu than about Karnataka, because we find that he has studied a lot of Tamil inscriptions. And he was able to find some evidence regarding the state. So when Bertenstein talks about segmental state, saying that Nadus are autonomous, but Karashima is able to find some evidence to say that there was interference of by the state in the functioning of the Nadu. So it affected the Nadu autonomy. So we find the state was trying to centralize administration. So we cannot say that state did not try to centralize administration. And in the case of Tamil Nadu, the Karashima was able to identify around 500 Nayakas. But in the case of whole of Vijayanagara Empire, he says there are 1,000 Nayakas. And of course, there are many Nayakas in Karnataka also. And also there are Telugu Nayakas and Kannada Nayakas, as you know. So large number of Nayakas may give us some idea regarding the extent of the state power. So the state was able to have very enormous powers. With the help of Nayakas, we find, as you know, they become the basis of state authority. The various wars and the victories which the Vijayanagara obtained is because of support given by the Nayakas. And Karashima also suggests that the king had tried to possess the centralized power by controlling the Nayakas. And these Nayakas were transferred from one place to another place. So by doing that, the king was able to centralize administration. So it is not that Nayakas were only important, but he says that after 1565, after the Battle of Taleigao, Rakasatangade, we find decline of Vijayanagara. So then Amaranayakas emerging as a strong authorities, as a strong feudal authorities, and this affected the state authorities. So we find that by this time there's decline of the state because of major war which Vijayanagara lost in this particular war. So we find that the particular Amaranayakas emerging as important by this period. Study by K.S. Shivanna. He talks about some feudal tendency under Vijayanagara. So we find there is emergence of serfdom and also exploitation of the peasants in the Vijayanagara period. He says that under Vijayanagara there was emergence of the feudal setup because we find the rise of landed intermediaries. So when you talk about feudalism, feudalism is nothing but creation of landed intermediaries between the state and the actual peasants. So that is the argument, that is the definition given by R.S. Sharma, so if you are aware of this. But Shivanna says that the Vijayanagara feudalism was not the same as European feudalism. So so they're different. So we find some differences between Vijayanagara feudalism and the European feudalism. So but then we find that you can find a feudal setup nevertheless in the case of Vijayanagara. So in that case, it would affect the subordinate peasants. So that is what we are trying to argue here. D.C. Sarkar also says he did not accept the idea of feudalism when he was in a debate with R.S. Sharma's Indian feudalism debate. So in that, D.C. Sarkar had said that that in ancient India there was no feudalism, but in the case of Vijayanagara, he says that there is feudalism. So so some scholars are trying to say that there was a feudal form of organization. Another scholar is Carla Sinopoli, who was attempted to analyze the various state models. As you know, centralized model is there, segmented state model, feudal model. So Marxist and non-Marxist theories have been analyzed by Carla Sinopoli, and she says that it is difficult to use one state model because there are so many models which are available, and also we find that Vijayanagara, there is divergent sources of power and authority within the imperial systems. So in this case, so there are so many nodes of power and nodes of authorities, so many centers of power. So we cannot say that which is what and which is having more power. So we find that the central government is able to have more power, and also we have to look at changes in history throughout. It is not that all kings were able to have this kind of control over the society or economy. Now, coming to agricultural production or agricultural relation, we have mentioned already that the dominant peasant and subordinate peasantry. Landlords under Hoysalas, we find they were the kings, ministers, and also they were the rich peasants. Like we find Nadu officials, also small peasants. So Nadus were there in Karnataka, as we find. Of course, the Nadus of Karnataka are not necessarily the same as the Nadus of Tamil Nadu. So the state distributed the land among the, say, Brahmanas, religious beneficiaries, including Brahmanas, Jainas, and others, and also secular authorities, maybe in the form of the officials. But so we find that under Vijayanagara and Hoysalas itself, we find there are dominant peasants and also there are subordinate peasants, because we find there are small landowners, large landowners. So there are people who have, peasants who have a lot of power, a lot of money, and there are some peasants who did not have this kind of the power. So we find there are small peasants also, as we have seen. And dominant peasantry was able to exploit the subordinate peasants because of the additional powers which the dominant peasants had, with the dominant peasants obtained from this from the state, from the king. So we find the king favored the dominant peasantry when compared with the subordinate peasants. Now, the king would interfere in the relation between the dominant peasant and subordinate peasantry only in the case of complaints from peasants. So if the peasants complained only, they would interfere. So that is only rare cases, rarest of the rare cases. Not that always they would interfere and they would try to protect the small peasant, because the state was more bothered about the collection of taxes. Revenue was important, as you know. Even today, even in the modern times, also revenue is very much important. So the state would not interfere unless it is informed of the particular problems faced by the small peasants. So in that case, we find Buttenstein's assessment of Vijayanagara, where he talks about Bhandaravada. There is a crown property, the property of the crown. Second is a Manya land. So Manya land is the land given as the land grants given to Brahmanas and others. And third is Amaranayakas. So we find Bandaravada, Manya, and Amaranayakas. So three form of land categories we can say, and having various meanings and connotations also we can find here. So these kind of three categories of land has been described by Buttenstein. Then K.S. Shivanna, he discusses the land ownership pattern and the land revenue. He mentions the landowners like the crown, Brahmanas, of course, the same as Buttenstein. So there is the crown is there, there's the state as the landed particular authority. Then there are Brahmana, there are temples, there are mathas and nayakas. So all these as the landowners. So they were the dominant, we can say, in terms of land ownership. So they were the major landowners. And Shivanna believes that land tenure system encouraged feudal exploitation of the cultivating class. So we find the cultivating class, the actual cultivators, those who go to the field, those who work there in the field. So they suffered because of the particular exploitation of the peasants, by the landowning class, because we find the large landowners had greater power and authority. Then landowners like Brahmanas, temples, and Nayakas, see, they belong to non-agrarian class. So they were non-agrarian class. So agricultural class is basically the peasant categories. So they needed the service of the agrarian classes like hired laborers, small cultivators, and the serfs. Okay, so we find landless laborers are there. So there are hired laborers, and there are small cultivators, and also there are serfs, bonded laborers. So all these we can find in the case of medieval Karnataka. So we find that. So on the one hand, there are dominant peasantry, and on the other hand, there are subordinate peasants who had to accept authority of the dominant peasant. So that is what we can find here. Brahmanas and temples obtaining land grants from the king. Sometimes, they used to get a huge amount of land also. So in that case, they were answerable to the king and not to the cultivators. So the land was given to the Brahmanas and the mathas, monasteries by the king. So with the objective of obtaining their support, and Brahmanas being very respectable caste community, so the Brahmanas who had to preach people to respect the state authorities. So that is one of the reasons why the land grants were given to Brahmanas. Non-agrarian class could control the agrarian community. So that is, you talk about Brahmanas, we talk about landed categories who were not actually cultivators, who were not actually agriculturists. So they were able to control agrarian community, leading to emergence of feudalism, at least in the respect of land administration. So not exactly when you say land feudalism, we do not mean that the state was weak, but we mean to say that in terms of land administration, at least in the case of agrarian relationship. So we find that the particular dominant peasants were able to control, they were able to dominate the subordinate peasants. So it affected subordinate peasants. So they have to find some way of dealing with these kind of problems. Now, Amaranayakas, actually we find, if you look at Sewell's, Forgotten Empire, Vijayanagara, there is a list of various Nayakas. So the list is obtained from of course, from the foreign sources, like by Fernand Nunes, for example, or Domingo Paez. So they give information regarding how much money they have to pay. Each Amaranayak had to pay to the state authority, so to the state or to the king. Now, because of this, the Amaranayakas had to pay some amount. So then they used to collect a large amount of money from the middlemen between the peasants and the Amaranayakas. So we find that. So when in the process they used to exploit the peasants, so the supporting peasants. So we find these small peasants and landless peasants, they have to pay more kind of taxes, or shell out more amount of money. So because Amaranayakas had a lot of power as mentioned by various scholars, so we find that they were able to exploit the peasant communities. We should also note that the state maintaining contact with the dominant peasantry, while they were not bothered much about the voice of the subordinate peasants, particularly in the metropolis, that is in the capital, that is in say Vijayanagara capital town. So in this situation, subordinate peasants had to devise strategies to avoid their exploitation. They have to find some ways of avoiding this particular exploitation by the Amaranayakas, because we find that they were asked to pay a large part of their produce as a tax or particular rent and all those things. So we find that they had to find some way of avoiding kind of this exploitation, which they suffered because of the dominant peasantry. Now, one way to avoid this problem was migration. So we find that the peasants migrating in South India, so in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra Pradesh, in Karnataka, we find various regions. We find that peasants began to migrate. Peasant migration is an attempt to actually to avoid the payment of taxes. So when there is increasing payment of taxes or increasing demand for taxes, so then they had to leave. They used to leave the land. So we have a lot of evidence in the case of Tamil Nadu and also Andhra Pradesh, particularly in the region of Tamil Nadu. So studies have been done, and they talk about migration of the peasants from one place to another place. But we find that because of various factors, this happened. So first is because land was available in plenty, large amount of land was there, and secondly, the peasants migrated in such a better prospects. So where they would not be asked to pay such a large amount of taxes. So maybe they can leave Vijayanagara territory. They can go to some other region, where there is not much of taxation, or they may leave the territory of one Nayaka and they will go to territory of another Nayaka. So migration is a reality, is what we find in most of the medieval sources. So we find that the peasant migration as a major development, and so they began to leave their territory and they began to go to some other places, and they would return also. So after some time, they may come back to their original place. So we find that there was peasant migration, but the state wanted to expand agriculture production and also wanted to ensure continuous supply of food crops to the subjects at a reasonable price. So if you look at foreign records also, foreign accounts, they mention that in places like like Badkal, for example, or in Hampi, so we find that they mention that food was available in a very cheap price. So how is that they were able to supply food at a cheap price? It is because of the supply of large amount of food grains and other items which are available, vegetables, fruits, and other things. And state was able to enhance its revenue by encouraging agriculture production, because if there is more production, they're able to collect more taxes, and with the help of more taxes, they can have more income, and with the help of more income, they're able to have a larger army, and also they can fight their enemies. So because Vijayanagara, they were fighting with their northern enemies, with the Delhi, with the Deccan Sultanate. So we find the Muslim dynasty. So we find all these problems which Vijayanagara faced. So they wanted a large amount of money in the form of taxes. Now, we have some evidence in the case of Karnataka, medieval Karnataka, for peasant migration. One inscription belonging to 1327 AD mentions that all peasants should have the possession of land. It said that all peasants should have the possession of land. That means that no one should leave the land, because if somebody leaves the land, then it's a problem for the state, because state would not be able to collect taxes, which they wanted to collect taxes. But while leaving the village or migrating to some other place, they should hand over the right to another person of the village. So it's very clear then that there was a migration of the peasants. So whenever they left the land, so you find that they have to give the right to another person of the village. It also mentions the rule of that the property of the elder brother belongs to the younger, and vice versa. So which means that the elder brother leaves, then the property goes to the younger brother. So younger brother leaves, the property goes to the elder brother. So because the main aspect is that the state wanted to collect taxes somehow. So that's the reason why they say that, or they have been very, very lenient in terms of land ownership policy. So saying that same family, they can retain the land ownership, but only thing is that they have to pay the taxes. So the collection of taxes was more important for the state than anything else. So that's what they were trying to insist on. So we find that Vijayanagara, following this kind of policy, where it's said that the peasants cannot leave the land. If they leave the land, they will have to appoint somebody else in their place. So we find that peasant migration was there. Peasant migration was there. So this is proved by particular the inscription as I mentioned. So so we find that there is this evidence of peasant migration in Tamil Nadu, but also in Karnataka. So in Karnataka and also in other region, those days of Andhra, so where there was Telugu speaking region, as discussed by Shivanna regarding agrarian relations in Karnataka under Vijayanagara. So we find we have this evidence of the peasant migration in Karnataka, also not only in Tamil Nadu region. So that is very important. So, but argument of a scholar called Ravi Anand Palat, he wrote a article, so where he said that peasant revolts in Vijayanagara was found only in Tamil region, but not in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, because he said that Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, they were the core territories of Vijayanagara Empire. So in those regions, there was no peasant migration. He thought that it's only in the peripheries, like in Tamil Nadu, that there was a migration of the peasants because of atrocity of the Nayakas. So it did not happen in the case of Karnataka and also in Andhra Pradesh. This was his argument, but we have this evidence to show that even in Karnataka also there was peasant migration. There are many inscriptions. I cannot mention all these records here. Study has been conducted even by Irfan Habib and also by K.G. Vasanta Madhava, then Shivanna, and many other scholars. So we have this evidence. I think more studies must be going on this particular area. 1408 AD, we find this Vijayanagara inscription giving some interesting details regarding peasant condition. It belongs to Kollegala Taluk of Karnataka. It mentions the members of a organization called Hadinentu Samaya. Hadinentu Samaya is mentioned. So 18 Samaya. So that is Hadinentu Samaya. Having a corporate character, comprising the traders, artisans, and others. So we find reference to traders, artisans, and others who are part of this particular Hadinentu Samaya, a large corporate organization which was able to have corporate structure and exploit the peasants because of the enormous power which they had. So this particular organization prepared a kattale, a kind of can we say a kind of order, can we say kind of a system for the farmers of the Nadu. It is mentioned that Hadinentu Samaya is aware of the problems faced by the peasants, and also it has provided tax relief to the farmers. So the farmers are given some tax relief, and so when the farmers face some problem because Hadinentu Samaya did not want the peasant migration. So that is the main reason why this kind of concession was given to the subordinate peasants. But in some cases, we find that the Hindu itself had to pay taxes when the peasants were not able to pay any taxes. So that also happened in some cases. Another Vijayanagara inscription mentions taxes on the new cultivators setting in the villages. So we find of new cultivators, which also indicates a migration of the peasants. So they must have been brought from somewhere else and they were planted in that particular place. And we find the taxes imposed on cultivators who decide to leave the place. So when they wanted to leave the place, so they have to pay a particular amount of money. They cannot simply leave like this. Otherwise, they will face the particular state of the authority. So the officials, the particular soldiers and commanders, so army can take action against such peasants. In some cases, the chiefs who possess an important position may take hons, that is honnu, or gold money from peasants who may express their discontentment through migration. So we find when they migrated, peasants had to pay money to the chiefs. So of maybe Hadinindu Samaya, so we find the chiefs were the members of the Hadinindu Samaya. So the peasants had to pay money for migration. So this was the very serious aspect, which also is important evidence, of course, to say that the peasants used to migrate because they would not stay in that particular place, because they would not manage, and they were not able to pay such a huge amount of taxes. So it is said that Okkalu means farmer, a tenant. He flees. He said that there is this reference to Okkalu. So when the Okkalu flees, the chiefs have to compensate for the loss to the state. So the chiefs have to pay loss to the state. So, in that case, of organization like Hadinindu Samaya, for example, comprising the chieftains. In some cases, the peasants live without coercion by the chiefs of the Gaundas, of the Gauda. So, Gaundas or the Gauda. So when the landed authority, they would not play a role in the migration of the peasants. So the peasants may migrate voluntarily without any kind of external force. In this case, it is said that not only leaders have to bear the loss and they have to pay the siddhaya. So there is the fixed tax to the state, so the income tax, the tax to the state which they have to pay. And this tax also comprises the farmer's share, which means that when the peasants left, we find that the superiors, that is the dominant peasants, the dominant peasantry was punished. So it was important for dominant peasantry not to allow the peasants to leave or to flee the land. So they were not supposed to leave the land. So we find that the farmers' loss had to be compensated by the chiefs. So we find that attempt of the dominant peasantry was to discourage that supporting peasants from leaving their land. So they were encouraged to stay in their own land, so that they will obtain the tax, and they're able to pay the tax to the state. So this was the major logic here. So we find that the chief had incentive to retain the farmers, maybe by use of force or by use of various other methods to making these particular peasants to stay in their own lands. Now, in this case, we find that the state did not take any initiative, or we don't find any evidence regarding that, to support the peasants or the leaders by giving some tax concessions. When we find that peasants suffered losses and they were not able to pay the taxes, so we find the state insisted on the payment or the collection of taxes. So loss incurred by the peasant migration had to be borne by the Samaya. So Samaya comprising the Gaudas, merchants and artisans. So we find that the Samaya, so we find this is also mentioned in the context of Ayavali 500 also. So it is a large trading organization, merchant organization, a trade guild, and also it is a kind of corporate organization comprising various kinds of communities. So it is not only traders and artisans and peasants, and also so we find landlords. So we find that the peasant, the Samaya had to bear the payment of taxes. So that is the major issue here. 1527, the peasants of Dumi village decided to leave the village as officer or governor or Ramana Nayaka. Ramana Nayaka demanded enhanced tax payment from them. So Ramana Nayaka demanded a larger amount of taxes. So they could not pay the taxes. So in that case, Ramana Nayaka issued the peasants that he would not exploit the peasants. So, so because we find that the peasants wanted to leave the land territory because they have been harassed, they have been exploited by Ramana Nayaka. So Ramana Nayaka himself says that he would not exploit the peasants and to make the peasants to stay in their own places, in their land, in their houses. So he says that don't leave the land. So I'm not going to exploit you. So that is what he says. 1528, you should know that, by this time we find, it's almost end of Krishnadevaraya. So within 1 year, he leaves, he dies. So then we find later Vijayanagara emerging. So there were a lot of problems in the later part of Vijayanagara Empire. 1528, local lord Adiyappa Nayaka, he was a feudatory of Krishnadevaraya. He prepared the regulations to be followed by cultivators to improve cultivation. So he says that this is the way how you can improve the cultivation. But the king heard that, the king was informed that, he got the intelligence in the report that peasants are going to violate the regulation. To compensate this, the king bestowed on Adiyappa Nayaka right to collect taxes such as Kanike, Mulavana, and tax on sugar. So, they were given some additional power. So instead of supporting the peasants, the king takes the side of the dominant peasantry. So we find that dominant peasantry, were able to obtain support of the king. So the peasants were affected in this case. So it is these kind of situations where subordinate peasants were not given support by the king or by the state, which affected supporting peasants, and in that case they were forced to leave the land, and that is what happens generally in this case. Vijayanagara inscription of 1533 of Adoni Taluka, Bellary district, mentions that peasants suffered because of the authorities exploiting them, and they decided to migrate from Kavatala Sime to Masavaya Sime, it is said, in Bellary district. So we find that the peasant migration we can find, because the peasants could not they could not bear this exploitation. So we find that, so they migrated. So we find it is center of the Vijayanagara state. So it's not periphery, it is a core region, and this we can find that in the core, in the major core part of, or central part of Vijayanagara, also the peasants were migrating. And official in charge assured the peasants to protect their interests, and they were requested to return to Kavatala Sime, it is said. So we find that the peasants were asked to return to their land, even though they wanted to leave the land. So they were told that they should come back to their land. We also find another inscription, which is a replica of the early inscription belonging to Kollegala Taluk, 1408. It refers to the rule of Achyutaraya. So we find that a very almost a century old inscription for 1408 AD inscription, which is repeated. The content is again found in another inscription. This record is dated 1534 AD. But so it is a copy of inscription of 1408 AD. So we find it almost more than 100 years old. Now, what is the need for the reissue of the inscription? There is a question which I asked here. And it appears that Samaya faced the problem of peasant migration. So it is, as it's mentioned, that Samaya have to pay the particular taxes in case the peasants left the land. So similar details are also found in this particular inscription. So we find that the peasants, when they left, so we find Samaya had to suffer. So Samaya had to pay the taxes, so which is not good for Samaya actually. And the Kattale, as we mentioned, the Kattale as particular document inform the members of the Samaya. So state was not prepared to bear the loss of income, particularly post Krishnadevaraya period. So we find that there was a crisis. If you look at it, we find Ramaraya and other kings, as you know. So this gave enormous authority to the local organization, and in return, this local organization had to supply the tax income in the absence of the peasant tax income. So that when the peasant did not pay the taxes, it is the local lords who had to pay the taxes. So this had an impact on the local lords, because they would not like to pay taxes, and then they used to force the peasants to pay the taxes. And the peasants were forced to pay the taxes, they had no other way but to leave the land. So they because of this kind of exploitation of the peasants, so we find that in some cases they had to leave the land. Now we also find that the state transferred the tax burden from one category of peasants to others, such as the Gaudas. So we find instead of the dominant peasantries, we find the lower classes, subordinate class was forced to pay the taxes. Or when subordinate peasants were not able to pay the tax, it is the dominant peasant who had to pay the taxes. Samaya tried to coerce the Gaudas to restrict to peasant migration, because Samaya did not want migration of the peasants. And also, the inscription does not mention the method discouraging the peasant migration, how to stop peasants from migrating from one place to another place. It is not mentioned, it's not very clear in the inscription. But it is very clear that what is clear is that that dominant peasants had the power to stop the peasants from migrating and leaving their land. And we find that it indirectly encouraged the village chiefs to use force to compel peasants to stay in their villages. It was important for the chiefs to force or to make the peasants to live in their same villages, in those villages. So it was extremely important that the dominant peasantry maintain or control this particular the particular small peasant, that is the subordinate peasant. So that is an important trend that we can find in the case of peasant migration in Karnataka. So what was important or relevant in 1408 was equally applicable in 1534. That is what we can find here. In 16th century, Vijayanagara was involved, as you know, in 1534, Vijayanagara was involved in this kind of struggle with the enemies, such as Deccan Sultanate. So Deccan Sultanate, so we find this prolonged war was taking place, and there was no end to this kind of war. So in this case, the state needed an enormous amount of tax revenue, and also its financial resources to manage its administration. So the one way of doing that was to obtain taxes, and to obtain taxes, they have to stop the peasants from migrating from one place to another place. But because of taxes, that there was migration of peasants, which becomes important here. So the study shows that in 16th century, we find there are many references to incidents of peasant migration because of exploitation by the Amaranayakas and other intermediaries. Feudalization of the administrative system was one reason, which led to incidents of large numbers of peasant migration in 16th century. So that is what I'm trying to argue, saying that because of dominant peasantry, so the particular importance given to them, and so in that case, creation of the landed intermediaries, having enormous powers. So and then they force the peasants to pay taxes, and the peasants could not pay the taxes. What would they do? So they would leave the land, and there was migration of people from one place to another place. But we also find that Amaranayakas, governors, and emperors initiated measures assured the peasants that they would not be exploited. So in some cases, because they wanted to make the peasants to stay in their own place. So in this connection, one can also say that Brahmanas as state agents also encourage the peasants to obey the state policies. So as we mentioned, so Brahmanas, how they used to preach the people that is non-Brahmanas, saying that they should stay in their own place. But in some cases, we find that because over taxation, so the peasants could employ migration as a weapon to avoid as a temporary measure. It was not a permanent measure. So as I mentioned, they would return to their villages after some point of time. So we find that peasants wanted to avoid any kind of exploitation by the state authority. So this is I think I've stick to the time. So